I have another question from Genesis chapter 1 and the event of creation to consider today. And that is, why did God create the world? Why did God create the universe and bring all things into existence? I've said before, and will remind us later, I'm sure, that we must be very careful when we ask the Bible why. We need to find answers to our Bible questions in the Bible, and not make them up and not presume or assume too much. We need to be careful about that. Sometimes the Bible tells us why and answers our why questions, but not always. And in Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and 3, as we look at the beginning of the history of God and His people, we don't really find a clear or definitive answer to the question, why did God create the world? Chapters 1 and chapter 2 just described that He did and how He did, and the order that He went through in bringing it about. Well, if the Bible doesn't tell us why, can we know? Maybe not definitively, and certainly have no right to be dogmatic about a question the Bible does not specifically answer. But there are some indications that are worth thinking about. In the creation event, notice that He brought all things into existence in verse 1. Created all things, heaven and earth. And then we see that it was without form and void. In other words, it had no shape and it was empty. And so God began to divide the atmosphere from what was below and above the atmosphere. He divided the waters from the dry lands. He brought order to the creation. And then He began to fill the space. He filled the space with the planets and the sun and the stars and the moon. He filled the seas with fish and aquatic life. He filled the earth with vegetation and then with animals. And finally, man. And God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness." And with the creation of humanity, God paused to give us an indication that there's thoughtfulness behind this part of creation. That God considered and determined and communicated that concern, even in the record of the creation. God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness." And God made them both, male and female, He made them. And He gave them dominion over the rest of creation, and then placed them very carefully in a special place within that creation in Genesis chapter 2, as Adam and Eve were put into the garden. And while we see this very particular focus on humanity as a specific part of creation, that should give us some indication as to God's purpose and plan, that this is really what the creation is about. The rest of creation serves a purpose for the welfare and the benefit of man or humanity in the world and in the universe as that part of creation that is in the likeness of God. And man before God becomes the story of the Bible. Man in fellowship with God, or man judged and rejected by God because of sin. But the story of the Bible certainly goes further in its attempt to bring God and man back together. God had a plan by which He would redeem humanity. The entirety of the Bible is about this redemption plan of God. So why did God create the world? It has something to do with this relationship with humanity that God determined He would establish in and by and for Himself. Thank you for considering this question with me today. And if you would like to study the Bible further, particularly if you are in the New York City area, look at my website, nycbibleteacher.com. Thanks for listening today.